Now, what do you think of that, about attitudes, about how people die? Remember the time of the AIDS, when what was happening in hospitals, when people would come in and nobody would visit the AIDS patient? Or families would be, one family would be over here, and the other family would be sitting on this side, or they'd be sitting in another waiting room. They were not mixed, you know. And the partner was not allowed to come in. You know, remember that? It was real. It was very real in the hospital. It was very real, and it was carried out. You know, and you know where the patient, if they were in homosexual and they had AIDS, you'd think that the patient who was diagnosed with that they were going to die, that AIDS patient, many times it's like, you cannot imagine the kind of equipment that they put on to go in and see the patient. It's almost like they're with helmet almost and lights, like they're going to go into coal mine or something. So it was just all these gloves and things, and so homosexual and heterosexual is still looked at so differently in hospitals. So I say, like, take care of your paperwork, please. You know, because when you arrive at the hospital door and you have a sickness, the hospital can make decisions for you unexpectedly that you may not realize. How about the word death? In this last time, when George Bush had people go, there was the bodies coming back were not allowed to be on TV. What you think of that? How we see the war dead, as opposed to like when the Vietnam bodies came back, or when they came back in 1945, 46, 47, 48 from Europe. And now we have so many people dying of hunger. But, you know.
I think the split on war death is that on one hand it's considered a wonderful, heroic way to die, but at various times in our history, I guess there is a desire to not think that the country is paying a price.
It's kind of interesting when you go to Washington, D.C. and you see all the monuments, you know. And if you look at the monument, and you look around for a monument of a poet or somebody in literature, can you find it? So what I mean is, this is, you know, it's just interesting how there is one dying and the other. And this thing called a good death. Like, what does that mean, a good death? The variety of ways that people die. You know, one guy, he'd come to see me because his job in Vietnam was to pick up body pieces. Vietnamese, Americans, sometimes he just was so numb, it just didn't matter anymore. And he, you know, when he came here, and he called when his child, I think, was about maybe 12 years old. And he said, well, you know, and when he called for some help, because he would go to the VA, he was a very businesslike, very successful. But then, you know, somebody said, you know, maybe you should go and get some private help. And I had done some work with the VA. I followed with the VA doing some talks, because when I got out of the military, I discovered the VA is like a separate entity from the military, but they take care of the patients. And so he says, my daughter started asking me about his background, like, what did you do in Vietnam? What was your job? He had never told her what she was 12. She wanted to know, like, well, will I die? You know, what will you do, or what will I do when you die? Kind of things She's, it was interesting, he had never talked anything about this, and suddenly she is asking these questions, and it put off a post-traumatic stress of these visions. He was having difficulty sleeping, and it was sort of like it was like an immigrant coming in. He would talk about things outside of him, Oh, yes, talking about his daughter's homework, how to get her to do her homework, and all kinds of other things. How is he going to pay, this and that and the other. So finally, it kind of close in to the part in the middle. And if you work with people from VA or that come from, one of the things they say is that sometimes I end up taking care of the therapist, because I start talking about these gory details about what happened or what I did, and I can see the change in the therapist. It's like they're shifting around and there's something going on, and it's almost like they pull back. I've said too much, and I think that's a good thing about having some supervision, and some consultation, that we have a way to to be present with the kind of gory details of what happens. There was an employee at the hospital who was dying, and she was very well liked, and she, whatever kind of illness she got, it happened very quickly that it was bed rest and she died. And what some of the nurses were saying, I hope she has a good death. And somebody else said, I hope her partner will be holding her when she dies. So there was all these visions about her, the last moment that we talked about, because we really missed her. She had this way about her, and she was also an immigrant from another country. I suppose she could go back if she wanted to, but it was still too dangerous, to return. So what it helped us was this in the staff meeting, how we talked about her in the very last moment and how helpless we felt. That some disease came in and grabbed her and took her out of our staff. The other part was how we were going to hire now another nurse to replace her. And that was a whole different story. When people die at work, for example, how that person comes in and it's the new seat, in that nature, or somebody commits suicide at home and they don't turn up. So,
I'm not sure I understand yet what you mean by a good death. Examples occur to me of deaths that are not good. Can you say what you mean?
it was a foreign term to me, something I'd never heard of before, a good death. And I had difficulty accepting this idea of a good death. I thought every death is okay. It doesn't matter how we die. That the way a person dies that needs just as much healing, whether it's violent or whether it's in a convalescent home or they die from with poor care, or like that person that died going into a food place. He just collapsed as he opened the door and his body fell in, and he was just died there at this restaurant. I think it happened a few years ago in San Jose. How a homeless fellow, how different responses we have. So that was like a different, when somebody dies, they die. There is no, I guess what I was thinking, there is no difference when the spirit leaves, no matter how bad they are in life, how good they were, or how they died, the spirit is still needing some acknowledgement to travel on. And I think that's what I was looking at.
I think the idea of a good death is a really uniquely American thing, and I'm an American, so I can't help but think in those terms, but, I mean, the father of American thanatology, a guy named Edward Schneidman, made a typical American top 10 list of the factors that define a good death. But I think what you're saying is that is not a notion that is widely shared, but just to give a flavor, in how Americans think about this, one ingredient of a good death is what we would call latency period. How long is it between you know you're going to die and you actually die? If it's 2 years, that's not a good death. This Edward Schneidman guy, he gave a number. This is so American. It's 2 weeks. That's it. If you find out that you're for sure going to die and then you got 2 weeks before it happens, that's a good death, because it isn't too protracted, but it gives you time to settle some things. Okay, I mean, and there's 9 more things on the list. So,
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about my own experience and the difference, knowing how someone died impacted me. So I'm just thinking about good death or bad death having to do with the internal experience of the people left behind. My youngest sister died, and I gave the eulogy, and at the time I thought she died one way, and then we got the coroner's report and found out she died another way, and it absolutely changed my relationship to her death. But the moment of her death was what it was. It didn't alter at all. But the experience for me was radical.
We have a saying in Irish: if you go into a village and you want to know what's going on there, don't go to the mayor. Go to what's called the Almadan. Almadan means the person who doesn't know anything, but they know everything. People assume like they know.
What is that word?
Almadan means like a fool or a clown. You go to who everybody thinks they know nothing. They're really stupid. But actually, they know everything. And there was this man who died in a village that was about 2 miles away from us, and he died. Everybody liked him, but he was addicted to alcohol, and so we don't have things in that eulogy. We don't have that, but we would read poetry, or we would sing songs, or we would dance, and we would do all kinds of things. We would talk about all the people that died before, but this person, we can't talk about them yet, And this turnout was an enormous parade that they had his body, because he was like the first homeless person that wandered from one farmhouse to the other and just slept in the sheds, and would get up and maybe get breakfast and wander off again. But he had this, everybody knew him, and there was this procession of him, through the town of all the places. He just traveled and took him into all the pubs he went to, and it took quite a long time to get him to the burial ground. And so, as opposed to the teacher I had, which was a very high-class society person when he died, very kind of a boring kind of guy, but had a very high status. Well, how these two deaths could see, in the same village, one very high status, and this man, he died, but it's sort of, after he died, he brought all these people together, people who never knew one another, maybe they probably seen one another, but it's people who had never talked. And there's a saying if you haven't talked to your neighbor, wait till somebody dies and go visit the house, then you break the silence and make up for not getting along right, So it's like after death he was much more powerful. And I had already left, so when I went back, I was asking for him, where is he? And so, oh yeah, and so, well, I want to know where he's buried. I didn't ask about anybody else where they're buried, but going to his grave was he was a very memorable, very kind, never harmed anybody, but had a, so when I was thinking about this word when I first saw it, good death, I think I saw the book or something and I couldn't figure it out. So I thought, I just want to introduce this kind of idea, like how we die and how do we want to die. And as Tom said, that sort of like happens, and when it happens, it just happens.